This is Damon Fordham. Now, I was born in a place called Spartanburg, South Carolina, which is in the upper part of South Carolina, and in Spartanburg on July the 27th, 1960. Sit-ins took place in that city. Now, for those of you who are a bit young, the sit-ins were where young African Americans, along with in some cases white sympathizers, would go to the segregated lunch counters at places like Cress and Woolworths, where you would sit down and get something to eat after you shopped. And because in those days blacks were not allowed to sit at those places. A lot of people who never made the history books took part in these things, and today I'm going to talk to you about one of them, a lady that I happen to know very well, as a matter of fact. Her name today is Carole Moore Richard, but back then she was simply known as Carole Moore. Okay. Now her story is that in July of 1960, she was a student at Carver Junior High School in Spartanburg, which is still in existence up there, and she was disgusted with some of the conditions of that time. She was also going to a majority Baptist church where the Reverend C.M. Johnson was the pastor. So basically her story goes such as this. In the 1960s, Spartanburg was a place that was ripe for change. We grew up hearing stories of black men being hanged for telling white women that their slip was showing, and our parents were very hardworking. The allowance that we received from our parents allowed us to walk downtown and purchase hair bonnets, paper dolls, etc. from Woolworths and Crest. Even though those stores had lunch counters, we were not allowed to purchase food and sit down to eat. I recall the water fountains near the entrance and exits. There was one for whites and one for quote-unquote colors. And she grew up in a very thriving, self-sufficient community on Spartanburg's south side. It was what then the Tobe Hartwell Projects. Along the area of South Liberty Street, which is also where I was born, I might add, you had a hospital for African Americans, the Bull Clinic Hospital, where I was born, as well as numerous other businesses, schools, and the like. Anyway, she goes on to say that she remembered hearing about the upcoming sit-ins in church and at the local NAACP meetings. And she says, a burning desire to be a part of bringing about change for my people and my community led to my participating in the sit-ins. She said that there were some black ministers and the priests who led the protests and marches. Of course, her minister was one of them, Reverend C.M. Johnson, and they decided to hold a meeting. She said that they were instructed that only the spokesperson for the group, who was in this case a man named John Hilton, would be the one to speak. The rest were instructed to sit straight and look ahead, regardless of what happened, until directed by their leaders to do so otherwise. Anyway, Carole and her sister went to Woolworths, her sister Elaine. So here's what happened once they received there. Once they returned there. She said that at the store we all entered the front door as onlookers gathered. We headed toward the rear of the store where the lunch counters were. Once there we sat down. We were ordered to leave. There were white people standing around jeering at us. No one would serve us. After sitting there, refusing to leave, they literally roped us into our seats. I don't recall what led up to our eventually getting up there to leave, but we did. The minister who led the protest was taken to jail via the front door. As we were leaving, the white men spat at us and continued to jeer. One guy spat on my sister Elaine and she kicked him. Chaos ensued and we were running with a mob and police were in pursuit. Actually, the mob went on to chase them to around the Liberty Street section of Spartanburg, where the police eventually broke up the mob. A number of people were arrested on both sides, and the African Americans were represented by Attorney Matthew Perry, who later became a first black Supreme Court justice in South Carolina, one of the first black Supreme Court justices in South Carolina. Anyway, from that situation, she goes on to say, my initial reaction was of anger. It made me angry to experience a system of laws where an angry, backward group of individuals were treated better than those of us who cooked their meals, raised their children, and cleaned their homes and clothes. Our parents did this while raising their own children and managing their own homes. yet we were alleged to have been inferior. I was also angry because I knew that some of our people had been complacent and thought that we were making trouble. And later that day, the show went on the news what took place, and her father saw the news and saw her sister running and said, "Hey, what was Elaine doing at that thing?" And he was angry at them for risking their lives like that, but then still Paul Moore, her father, felt a sense of pride for his daughter's courage. Carole Moore Richard went on to become involved in politics in Philadelphia and a spokesperson for people up there. And she returned to Spartanburg, South Carolina, where she lives today and continues to speak out on various issues. To this end, she says, "I would encourage young people to register and vote after thoroughly educating them about the power of the ballot. I would also encourage them to be mindful and to utilize wisdom in how and where they spend their money. I would tell them to get a real education, that is, one where they would not submit to being labeled an honor student or merely an honor student while being unable to string one sentence together without butchering the King's English. I would tell them that they must love themselves and their people enough to patronize their businesses, to network and mentor one another as we succeed. I would suggest that each one help one, and last but not least, remember your history while examining with a critical eye the current status of our people." Now, you see, in just about every neighborhood, you can probably find someone like Miss Carole Moore Richard who has a story like that to tell but will miss the history books. So it's important that you get with these people and take down their histories. Anyway, I wrote a book about her story and a number of stories like this called True Stories of Black South Carolina, which you could order from Amazon or the History Press or various other websites. And I encourage you to read books of this kind and do a lot of studying and research on your own. My name is Damon Fordham with the story of Carole Moore, the 11-year-old activist.